Awesome. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all today. Yeah, Chase Glenn, and I'm an LGBTQ plus advocate at heart. I've been doing this work around LGBTQ inclusion for over 15 years, both in the for-profit and nonprofit sectors. I do this sort of consulting work with businesses, both large and small organizations, governmental agencies, and some of that looks like leading some and facilitating some of the workshops and trainings that I've done with Bucket List in the past around unconscious bias and LGBTQ plus inclusion in the workplace. And but it also is about consulting organizations, consulting with them to look at sort of their processes, their ways of engaging their team members, whether it's managers or others in their organization, to think about LGBTQ plus inclusion and how we're creating safe and affirming and inclusive spaces for everyone. So just really grateful for the opportunity to be here with you all today and to share this space with you.
Thank you, Chase. Ali?
Well, hello everybody. I'm Allie, and it's just such a privilege to be here today. I think where we can come together to discuss two topics and two areas, but that are just not important, but essential to the success of our organizations and places and spaces where we connect and interact with people. That's DEI, DIB, and all of the other acronyms that come with that, and why recognition is so important. So in my role, I have the honor of leading efforts that ensure people are not just heard, but they're celebrated for who they are and the unique perspectives that they bring to the work. So that ecosystem of belonging, that ecosystem of how we interact with each other in work that of MSF is incredibly difficult and challenging. And so today, I want us to think about how the true inclusion spaces, inclusion creates spaces where everyone can thrive, and how recognition isn't just about saying thank you. It's important, but just acknowledging the powerful impact that diverse voices and contributions have on the work that we all do. So I'm really excited and looking forward to an inspiring and action-driven conversation with everybody. And I just come to this work. I'm an activist by heart. I remember my first work around inclusion and understanding of people centered around anti-Blackness and violence that were occurring in the 90s and the early 2000s, worked really heavily with the LGBTQ community around the AIDS crisis that was so devastating to the community. So just being an ally and an activist, so growing up in that really kind of informed this work that I do. I'm intentional about it. And so I'm looking forward and excited for us to have this inspiring and active driven conversation about recognition, but how it ties into and is a part of DEI. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you both for those intros. It's so great. We all come from such different backgrounds and our perspectives. So it'll be really great having this conversation and sharing with one another. And so really quickly for today, just to center this conversation, the three of us have looked over questions that folks have submitted prior, and we've really broken down this fireside into three key topic areas. The first part of it, we want to go a little bit broader and talk about building a culture of diversity and inclusion through recognition. We definitely also want to go into inclusive strategies for fairness and representation. And lastly, of course, because today we're talking about leadership's role in culture, it would be remiss if we did not touch upon how we can drive diversity and inclusion through leaders. Awesome. So we'll get started now. First question. How can recognition help foster a culture of diversity and inclusion within an organization? Ali, I'll pass this one to you first.
I think how recognition drives that is because in a in a if recognition is intentional, and not just a kind of passing phase or performative, then it really forces people to recognize and acknowledge the work of others. So whether you do that formally or whether that's just part of your culture, I think it's critical that it be part of the intentional work, that there's focus on acknowledging what the diverse voices and efforts of the people in your organization, what they bring, how they change the makeup of your organization for the better. You can have great systems, you can have great technology, but if you have unhappy people, if you have people who don't feel heard, seen, or valued, and what does that mean? Then you have an organization that cannot thrive, that eventually will suffer. So for me, it's a critical and a vital part of the process.
And earlier today, a lot of our icebreaker questions were around how does recognition make you feel and all of that. And a lot of people were saying, happiness, feeling valued, feeling belonging is such a great, that's just what recognition makes people feel. And so what you were saying there just really reminded me of that. And how about you, Chase?
I think just to tag on, that sort of that line of thinking, which is, people who feel recognized for who they are, their authentic selves, and the ability to bring their full selves to work with them, and to not have to feel like they have to check certain parts of themselves at the door. That just makes us, it not only just makes us feel better, but it makes us more productive, and a happier person wants to be a part of a team, and wants to collaborate more, and has that sort of sense of safety, right? And so when we talk about recognizing people and being as inclusive as possible to sort of create that sort of, I guess, the environment where people can bring their full selves, and really, without saying things like, talent, recruitment and retention, but that's a part of it, right? When people feel safe and included, and once, makes a space where people want to stay and want to be and want to contribute.
100%. And you'll be known as the employer who is really good at making people feel included. Word of mouth, we talk about recruitment, retention. It is a lot of like word of mouth where you're getting referrals in because people love working there. All of that comes together. And I would love to.
That it's that trust, right? That confidence that I don't need to be perfect. And what does performance look like? Right? If people are working really, really hard and not being acknowledged for their efforts, and sometimes when things that they're not paid to do, right? They do it because they want the organization to grow, they want the department to shine, and no one recognizes it in any way, formally or informally. Think about how that creates a toxic and how that shrinks you, as Chase said, how you don't feel you can bring your authentic self. And ultimately, that is bad for the organization. So leaders who don't build recognition is actually, in the long run, hurting the end goal for the organization.
Mhm. And now I think it would be great to talk about some ways on the not the flip side necessarily, but like the other way of looking at it, where it's great, recognition is great for driving diversity and inclusion, but what are some practical ways to make sure that recognition programs themselves, when we're implementing them or we're in them, how can we make sure that those programs are inclusive and everyone feels valued?
Don't know if you want me to hop in there, Rebecca. You can, Rebecca can attest to this. In each of the sessions, workshops that I facilitated with Bucket List, I always include a portion that revolves around language and the words that we use and the power of our words. A really practical example of how we can, be more inclusive is to be more thoughtful about the words we use and more intentional. And when it comes to LGBTQ plus inclusion conversations, I mean, that's everything from opening up our language to not be as gendered and being more aware of the ways that we refer to people and the assumptions that we make, right? We all make assumptions. It's just a natural part of how our brains work. But how do we pause and become more intentional about the language we're using to create spaces that are more open, inclusive? I can just really, if you have a moment here, to give a personal example
Yes.
of sort of my sort of lived experience. Something I haven't shared yet here is that I'm a trans man. And so I was working in the corporate sector when I transitioned. I was in a job in a workplace, a large tech corporation, and I had some really great experiences within that organization when I transitioned. And when I began my transition, I had some that were not so great. But one moment that stood out to me that I think about often is, shortly after I had shared with my manager, my team leader, that I was, going to begin my transition. I was using a different name. I was using different pronouns. It was only like a couple of weeks later that we were in an all hands meeting, and I was recognized, and I was given this award for performance. And I don't even remember what the award was for exactly, but I had this moment where I panicked because I realized what they were doing. They were getting ready to recognize me. They used the correct name when they recognized me. That felt good. I was gendered correctly. That felt really good. But the moment that really stuck with me is they invited me up on stage to hand me this plaque. And I thought, there is no way my correct name is on this plaque. This was only a couple weeks ago that I shared with them that I was beginning my transition. And they handed me that plaque, and it had my name on there that I go by. And the power of that moment and this feeling seen and heard and recognized and supported and valued because of my name and the language that they were really intentional about, because they could have very easily just taken that plaque that was probably already ordered and given it to me and said, well, we'll do better next time. But they were intentional with their language and their support of me.
I love that. And it's so easy to say like, oh, next time I'll do better. I'm so sorry this time kind of just it didn't work out. But the fact that they did their best and made sure that you felt that you were being recognized for who you are and what you did for the company speaks volumes as an employer.
Mm.
Ali, was there something you wanted to? I saw you open your mouth, so I was curious if you were gonna
No,
talk.
I was just really touched by that. But again, it goes to the power of it, right? It they were intentional. Keep coming back to that. Recognition, in order for it to really work and not be a checkbox that is on your list of benefits, has to be intentional. And it is in those moments that intentionality matters. I don't know how long ago that happened to Chase, but he recalls it and recounts it with such vividness that we all felt how appreciated and valued, seen and respected he felt in that moment, right? It was a plaque, but it's all of what they did to ensure that it was his plaque. That was it. It just illustrates how critical it is and how a lot of organizations kind of overlooks that. But listen to how he recounts it. That's the power of intentionality. That's what I wanted to add. There are many other things you can do practically. Cultural sensitivities that you can build in, peer-to-peer nominations. I mean, there are lots of things, but at the end of the day, what is that designed to do? What do you want this to facilitate? And that's why, um, you know, whatever it is you're doing, big or small, or just starting, or maybe continuing to refine a mature recognition program that is kind of embedded into the way we work, at the core of it is that it is there to make people be empowered and to feel like they matter to an organization where many times we all spend quite a bit of our time.
Mhm. I'd love to dig into a key pillar, I would say, of recognition programs, which is peer-to-peer recognition.
Yes.
Yes. I feel like peer recognition just really encourages those diverse voices to come forward. I think it's so smart to spread that responsibility of recognition. I know traditionally it's, top down, but when anyone and everyone can give it to each other and we don't leave the expectation just on managers, I feel like more good work can be seen because the reality is leaders are busy managing a bunch of people. I work closely with a bunch of my peers and they know 100% what it is that I'm doing and they can better speak to it with more detail, which I really appreciate. And so um, I think peer recognition is just such an important piece to DEI even.
I want to add one more that we don't think about, and it's the cultural sensitivity.
Mhm.
And we have to ensure that even if we're building a program or we are in a program that's more mature, that program, coming back, connecting the dots to DEI, must respect the diverse backgrounds and cultural practices. So, for example, as you're building it or refining it or tweaking it or thinking about it, consider the people that work there, consider the staff, consider how different cultures value public versus private recognition. Again, intentionality. Because peer to peer might be great, but in some cultures, that public recognition can be very uncomfortable. And so we also have to build in that cultural sensitivity into our programming. Whether it's formal or informal, that really has to be at the base of it. And it's oftentimes not considered, quite frankly.
And how would you suggest understanding those cultural sensitivities that we should be building in?
Well, one of the things areas that I like to do, particularly if I'm helping an organization, in my previous life, I worked with lots of large Fortune 500 companies and corporations to build out, and boards and corporate boards and non-for-profit boards to build out DEI programming. And one of the, sometimes it's just having anonymous surveys. Um, you know, how do you, what's your cultural recognition? Cultural recognition. Does the organization do anything on celebratory months? Like, right now we're in Hispanic Heritage Month. Uh, so ask folks, make it anonymous if you have to. Have really one or two good questions, and try to glean as much as you can, um, those cultural sensitivities. Also, if you're go to the heads of your departments. If you're in people and culture, I don't use the word HR too much anymore, but if you're in people and culture, talk to leaders. Um, what should we know that we don't know? But for me, I always start with, if folks don't know, I always start with a survey. Make it anonymous, ask a couple of questions, see if we can get to the heart of that.
Love
What do
that.
people prefer?
And I like the example you brought with the holidays, just because that one's a great one to start. It's easy celebration. Like, oh, happy for me from Chinese background. It is like, oh, I'm blanking on the English word for it, but it's like the moon cake festivals.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just really fun to hear other people like say, oh yeah, happy Lunar New Year or whatever it is from my culture. It just makes me feel so recognized and that they took the time to understand what might be important to me and my family. Yeah. And Chase, was there anything you wanted to add?
I was just saying, also just give yourself permission to not be the expert about every single thing, right? Sometimes we feel like, oh, well, I have to have all the answers and I have to keep it all kind of buttoned up. Like I know all the things, right? look around you. Who's sitting at the table with you, right? Who's in the room? Who's missing? Bringing more people into the process and into the work, and having a diverse set of voices around us always is that's what helps make us even more inclusive. And you don't have to know all those things innately, right? Use your resources and bring more people into the mix, and those are the types of things we learn together.
Amazing.
Mhm.
Awesome. Let's move to the next question about how can leaders drive diversity and inclusion through recognition? I know we touched upon a few of these already, so I think it's a nice little flow to get more into it. Ali, would you like to go first for this one?
I'm on mute. I apologize. You know, I think leaders play a critical role. Now, we can define leaders, and I'm not necessarily talking about titles, right? So if we can have leaders with titles, but you have people who are informal without the title, leaders in their space. People go to them, they trust them, they become your champions. Find your champions. Um, but if you're talking about titled folks with title leadership, for me, I think lead by examples. Leaders should consistently model recognition behavior by openly acknowledging the efforts and the achievements of individuals and teams. Sets a tone, sets a tone. Make it personal. Make recognition personal. Make it specific. Recognize general actions. Don't be generic behaviors or results that align with organizational values, or just that someone did something really well and you want it known. Then create opportunities for recognition. Integrate recognitions. I do that into my one-on-ones with my directors, team huddles, newsletters. It becomes a routine part of how we communicate. Remember what I said, intentionality. Remember what I said, ecosystem of belonging, the way we work, the way we connect with each other. Recognition becomes very easy to do when it's embedded into the culture. And then finally, I think good leadership empowers others to recognize. Encourage that peer-to-peer recognition by providing tools or platforms, opportunities for us to appreciate one another, ensuring that it's inclusive and not just, top down. So many ways that leaders can drive that.
Totally. And Busayo in the comments is also sharing here, sense of tone, making it
Yes,
personal, creating opportunities for recognition,
yes.
embedding it into that ecosystem. I love that ecosystem term here. It's very, yeah, it's very, very mindful, intentional. Chase, would you like to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many good little tidbits there that Ali shared, and Basayo definitely they picked up on all the things that I was picking up on also. But I think what Ali said about that sort of authentic sort of how it is sort of integrated into our way of being. And I think we're all pretty good at trying to think what's the PC way, the work appropriate way to say this, but we all have a good sort of gauge on when something is real and when it's not real. And if someone is only recognizing things on a particular month out of the year, and every year when that month rolls around, that's when they mention such and such, or they recognize so and so, you can't make people be a certain way, right? We can't force leaders into being authentic. That's clear. But we really as organizations should be looking at how is this practice of recognition and practice of inclusion integrated into every aspect of how we do our business, how we relate to our team members, how we bring people in, how we onboard them, how we, the entire life cycle of a team member, right? How is this all integrated in an authentic way? All tied back to the organization's goals. And, but we as humans are pretty good at recognizing when something is kind of just fake and it's just on the surface, right? So as much as possible, we want this to just be threaded throughout the organization.
Amazing. Now let's move into talking about unconscious bias and how we can prevent it in employee recognition programs. Might be good for us to start by giving a quick definition about unconscious bias. Chase, would you like to take that one?
Sorry, I got to come off mute here quickly for my textbook definition here. Very briefly, don't Google me on this because this is not the textbook definition, but we're talking about, these are unconscious bias. These are social stereotypes, right? Things that are sort of baked into sort of our own way of thinking about things and living in the world that are oftentimes, built on sort of cultural narratives and dominant narratives and messages we've received for our entire lives, right? So it creates this sort of framework and this lens that we view the world through. And a lot of times, it's just based on, things that aren't fact and they aren't true and they aren't rooted in any sort of truth. And so they impact the way that we see the world, we view things, how we deal with things. And it's called unconscious bias for a reason. A lot of times we don't realize we have the bias to begin with, but it can impact how we, implement programs, like recognition programs for sure.
Thank you for that. It's a really great definition. We should attribute that to you on Google. But Ali, I'll pass that to you first then. The question was, what strategies can prevent unconscious bias in recognition programs, and how can we ensure that all contributions are being equally valued and celebrated?
Well, if I stay with the definition, the example of the lens. So unconscious bias, right, is like wearing invisible glasses that shape how we see the world without us even realizing it. Oftentimes based on snap judgments or stereotypes on someone's appearance, their background, their identity, and it influences, as Chase mentioned and said, our decisions and our actions, often in ways we don't consciously intend, right? So that's the unconscious piece of it, intent versus outcome. And so in the context of employee recognition, unconscious bias can cause us to favor certain people or behaviors, like consistently recognizing the person who speaks out a lot, right? While overlooking, remember Chase talked about who's sitting at the table. Sometimes the quiet people, they're quiet, but they have equally valued contributions, but we're not recognizing them because our bias says that they couldn't be as valuable in their contribution because they're quiet. So the hidden lens can intentionally lead us to some employees being overlooked or undervalued. So to prevent that in recognition, what do you have to do? You have to swap out these invisible glasses for clear, intentional focus, being mindful, ensuring diverse voices and contributions are acknowledged, creating equitable opportunities for everyone to be recognized, whether they're leading or whether they're working diligently behind the scenes, recognizing brilliance in all its forms. So swap out the invisible glasses for clear, intentional ones.
Oh, I love that. Recognizing brilliance in all its forms. And Chase,
And that kind of talks to us also a space at Chase and folks, that a lot of time is where the difficulty in neurodivergency happens, right? That we don't recognize brilliance in all its forms. So I hope we get a chance to talk about that. I saw someone mention that in the chat.
Yeah. And Chase, I was going to say that when we had previous conversations about it, you were talking about how important it is to rethink criterias of what does get recognized. I would love to hear your thoughts around that.
Yeah, I mean, it really just goes along with everything Ali just said, which is, when we're thinking about what we reward and what we recognize, the old model, traditional model is you just are based very much on like production. Performance means more sales and producing more leads and, that sort of model. Well, what are we rewarding? What are we recognizing? It doesn't have to always follow that sort of traditional model. Of course, we do want to still recognize those types of things, but think sort of this feels sort of like kind of like cyclical, but what if we're recognizing those people who are acknowledging sort of the importance of DEI efforts, and what are we acknowledging sort of the people who have gone through the work of going through additional trainings or certifications, or people who are working in the background on so many projects. And a lot of times they don't get the recognition for that, right? So it's just rethinking those criteria, and again, give yourself permission to not be the expert. You don't have to come up with all the things, right? There are a lot of people that can help think through these types of diversifying the sort of the initiatives and the programs and the activities that we reward.
Totally. We talk a lot about what gets recognized gets done. And so if you're then shifting that and you're recognizing the DEI efforts, the programs that people are doing, then it's putting a lot of spotlight on those behaviors. And then that's when we'll kind of start to see more of it. And 100%, we should be recognizing DEI efforts. That's so important. Mhm. Shall we move into some common pitfalls to avoid when we're implementing these recognition programs so that we can support diversity and inclusion? Ali, do you want to take the stab at this one first?
I, 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 I think the common pitfall is that recognition is not connected. I think, again, that lens, that it's not connected to DEI, that it's something that it's an activity that if we're going through a difficult financial times, we can get rid of, right? Because we don't recognize how it's embedded, how we haven't done a good job of embedding it. So the first thing we have to do is to understand that recognition is not just a check benefit of HR, so to speak, that traditional, but that it is a part of our cultural identity. And so that's the first pitfall, that in difficult financial times or in down times, we can get rid of these things that are not important. The other thing is pretending that you're the expert. I think Chase comes back to that often, and I think that that's really critical. It is a pitfall because the pitfalls aren't that you're not doing enough. The pitfalls is why you're doing what you're doing, how you're embedding it, right? And that you're constantly setting yourself up, whether you're in people and culture, whether you're the director, that top down is a pitfall that you have to avoid. Talk to people, ask them. Sometimes your organization, it can't be about money, right? Maybe that's the space, but what would you like to see? Maybe it's one of the ones that we instituted at MSF, which is just so popular, is Summer Fridays. It's Friday at 3 o'clock. Everybody, you're done. Because we're in a tough business. Now, if I was to say we're not having Summer Fridays, y'all might just be seeing me on the news because I'm in an ambulance somewhere. It is so popular. It's not about money. So it's those kinds of things that I think we do. And so the pitfall is to A, as Chase says, don't think you're the expert, ask people, not make it top down, and B, embed it into the culture. So even in difficult time, we lean on the recognition even more to get us through it as an organization.
Mhm. I think that budget piece is so important too. We did get a lot of questions before this conference about, what to do when you don't have that big of a budget, but you still want to make people feel recognized. And so if you can embed it into the culture, like you're saying, and it just becomes such an integral piece, it, yeah, budget, it won't be cut when the fiscal year is not doing so good. Yeah. And
Yeah,
Chase,
and you're talking about not only are you talking about recognition initiatives and programs that might get the budget cut, you're also layering in DEI, and that gets the budget cut. These are two things that usually are the first things to go, right? So this is a time that it's even more important for us to be getting real about what that looks like, as Menard been said, being embedded throughout the organization, because then it'll hopefully be something that retains, and it has staying power. I think, for me, another sort of pitfall, and it's kind of going back to this conversation around unconscious bias, and leave it to the education and training guy to be like, oh, we should do some more training. And I know no one likes training, and I'll be the first one to acknowledge that. But having these conversations around unconscious bias and recognizing that, what, our leaders, our team leaders, our managers, they all should be getting that training. They all should be getting some education around what that looks like. So we all are able to sort of, keep our minds open to the fact that that can permeate programs, and you don't even, it's insidious. You don't even realize that it's there because it's unconscious. And then, until it's maybe, caused an issue in the program, that then the program has lost its power, right? So and some of its value. So incorporating, I think a pitfall there is not recognize the importance of education, and the opportunity for employees to learn and grow and gain some insight in that area.
along with that, just asking for help and recognizing what you don't know or what's not like your strongest suit and getting that expert advice to come in and just, yeah, educate and learn.
I also want to add this. I think being inconsistent with your recognition is also important. So it's a thing, and then we all of a sudden we don't do that thing anymore, but nobody knows why we don't do that thing anymore. And so it's a common pitfall because it's a thing. So, hey, during a specific celebratory month, we're recognizing everybody. Yay, we love you. You're the best. Thank you for all you do. Thanks for your service. And then after that, 6, 7 months later, nobody knows what anybody's doing. So a big pitfall is being inconsistent. Either you're gonna do it and it's part of your culture, or if you are, be consistent.
Totally. Helps with the sustainability of all programs. It's hard to have all this hype, launch it, and then a few months later, where'd it go? Yeah, I saw in a study somewhere that in a context of recognition that a good cadence is like once a week. And so that just kind of shows the frequency at which, people like to be recognized, like to feel heard and seen. And honestly, being inclusive, it should be an everyday thing. So we are ending the end of time. Sorry, that was a weird way to put it, but y'all know what I mean. But and so one last question. I think this will be a great one to kind of summarize it all and do like a few key takeaways for organizations who don't have a formal recognition program or haven't included DEI in the recognition program. What are some great ways to start making sure that those two programs are sort of talking to each other? And Chase, I'll let you take this one first.
I was going to punt it over to Allie, because I really do think, as someone who has, worked within these large organizations and has implemented these types of programs, Allie is probably much more qualified to answer that. So this is me admitting I'm not an expert. Please, Allie.
Sorry, I was on mute talking. Say the last part again, Rebecca. because I was thinking something else.
Yeah, no worries. For organizations who don't already incorporate
Ah,
DEI and recognition with each other, how do you start?
well, I think the first thing is, if depending on who's doing it, and usually it's people and culture or your traditional HR, is to begin the conversation with the leadership, right? To begin to buy in, to have leadership buy-in. That's number one. And to make the business case for it, to make the people case for it, why it's important. Perhaps you have good data analytics and you see that, we're slipping on retention, or we're not attracting the kind of skill or staff or candidates that we want to. Well, if we're not able to increase our salary per se because of our budget, is there a space for recognition to be part of our benefits program? The benefit of being an employee. So I think that one of the ways that you start is to understand why you don't have one. What's the importance of having one? Getting leadership, start with leadership buying, engage leadership by demonstrating the benefits. Present the people business case, the ROI of inclusive cultures, recognitions, improved performance, reduced turnover, attracting talent, that kind of a thing. And then launch something. Begin small. Begin small. Don't try to, you know, don't try to have a really mature program. Begin with a small scale program, a simple recognition. Peer-to-peer might be one of those. Manager, I used to work at a small non-for-profit, and we would have manager lead out, shout outs during meetings. Oh, just want to recognize Ali did a great job on that project. Everybody, woohoo! It begins to implement a recognize one another initiative where employees can just send notes of appreciation. And maybe it's a digital platform visible. Of course, having your DEI goals. So there's a lot of things you can do to start, but start with leadership buy-in, then launch something, and then begin to slowly embed it into your everyday practice, your operation, by encouraging team members to celebrate achievement. Notice I didn't say giving people extra money, right? Because maybe you don't have that budget. But highlighting the DI progress in your company meetings, or maybe you start a newsletter, and then measure it, track it. What are we seeing? What's the trend? Is the Recognize One Another initiative working? Nobody ain't doing it. So I think there are ways in which you can start without it being onerous and burdensome.
I think that's such a great point when it comes to new programs. A lot of us, I feel like, get really excited. We're like, all right, Becca, go off and create this new recognition strategy. And I'm like, it just gets bigger and bigger, like scope creep, right? And so it's so great that you're talking about starting small. These are little things you can do, get buy-in from the top down so your other champions can help you out. And then, of course, seeing and evaluating how that little micro pilot went, and then deciding which direction you should go in after the fact. Love it. Well, we are at the end. Chase, was there anything you wanted to add to that conversation there before we move along?
No, I knew there was a reason why I wanted to just hand it over to Ali to begin with. That was comprehensive and wonderful. And I'm sorry,
Chase
Ali, for
put me
putting you
on
on
the
the.
spot. He's like, Ali, you go.
I know. I'm sorry. I should have given you a heads up. I'm sorry, but it was
I
amazing.
love it. I'm okay. I know you would bail me out if I floundered. I
Love
was confident you would hold me up.
it. Love it. And I'm really loving Yvonne's comment here in the chat too, how, DI recognition, it's stuff that it takes the whole team to have it permeate and really work and be successful. So it's a great place to end, I think, on this topic.